The mystery of those silent dinner dates. I have sat in many therapy rooms where middle-aged men, sometimes very successful, sometimes completely ordinary, sit in front of me with the same kind of look in their eyes. The look of someone who feels pushed to the margins of his own life. They are not exactly exploding with anger, but they are not at peace either. It's a kind of tired confusion, as if they were silently asking, "I've done everything I thought was right, so why is everything still going wrong?" And strangely, many of their stories begin with details that seem almost laughably small. A dinner, a half-hearted conversation, a moment of being told, "You're too quiet." One man told me about that evening in the restaurant. His wife was upset because he didn't talk much, accusing him of being distant, cold, no longer in love. What she didn't see was that just an hour before that dinner, he had been scolded for sharing too many opinions, for daring to suggest that perhaps they should rebalance the family budget. He stayed quiet at the table, not because he had stopped loving her, but because he was trying not to trigger another argument. Yet that defensive silence was immediately interpreted as proof of indifference. He sighed and asked me, "Is there anything I can do now that isn't wrong?" Stories like that push me toward a bigger question. What has happened between our grandparents' generation and the present that makes so many men feel as if the rules of the game in relationships have been rewritten without anyone telling them? Are women in the past truly completely different from women today? Or are we being drawn into a simplified story that exists just to give us an easy villain to blame? In the minds of many men, there is a very powerful image of the ideal woman, usually a composite built from memories of a grandmother, a mother, and stories heard in childhood. It is the image of a woman who cooks well, knows how to stretch money, takes care of the children, stands quietly but firmly behind her husband as a solid home front. She is hard-working, rarely complains, and is grateful for what her husband brings home. In that memory, everything seems orderly, stable, simple. Men go out to work, women manage the home, and everyone knows their role. The problem is that this memory is highly selective. Few people go into detail about the pressure, the loneliness, the unfairness that many women of previous generations had to endure. Not being allowed to choose their own career, not having control over finances, not being able to leave even in the face of abuse, not having the right to say, "I'm tired." When we only keep the polished fragments of memory, we unintentionally turn the previous generation into a nostalgic ideal that we then use as a yardstick to judge the present. Meanwhile, young women today are growing up in a completely different world. They get more education, have more opportunities to earn their own income, are allowed to dream of a personal career, and are encouraged to live for yourself, love yourself first. They hear thousands of advertising messages, films, and social media posts that tell them, "You deserve better. Don't settle for less than you're worth." If your grandmother's generation was taught endure and sacrifice, the current generation is being taught almost the opposite. Don't sacrifice. Don't put up with it. In the therapy room, I meet young women who say things that sound very similar to what the original essay criticized, but when we dig deeper, we see the foundation under those statements. A young woman says, "I don't want to just be a housewife," but she says it against the backdrop of an entire childhood watching her mother work all day, then come home and take on all the housework, being yelled at by her father and still forced to stay silent. Another says, "I want a man with a stable career," but beneath that sentence is a deep fear of returning to the financial instability she grew up with, where every argument was about, "This house has no money." When a man reads an essay that paints modern women as ungrateful, incompetent, but highly demanding, it is very easy for him to nod along, because it resonates with the most painful parts of his own experience. But from a psychological perspective, we have to be very careful with the move of using a handful of extreme experiences to define an entire generation. The feeling that women now are nothing like grandma is partially rooted in reality, but it is also partially an illusion born from the way we compare what we like in the past with what we find difficult in the present, without paying attention to the difference in context. Even so, to be fair, we also have to acknowledge a somewhat uncomfortable reality. In a lot of the therapy stories I see, the gap between what each person expects from a partner and what they are realistically able to contribute to the relationship is widening in a worrying way. And this is true for both genders. I've met women near 30 who are intelligent, well-educated, charming to talk to, but to be completely honest, they have almost no basic life skills. They can't cook, don't know how to manage money, don't know how to take care of their own health or sleep. They live off delivery food, spend according to impulse, ignore regular health checkups. They are not the majority, but they are not rare either. In relationships, they hope for a man who is simultaneously a financial pillar, an emotional therapist, and the one who organizes every plan for the future. When those expectations are not met, they use words like immature, not proactive, not romantic enough. At the same time, I also meet men nearing 40 who are solid in their careers, hard-working, responsible, but who almost cannot express their emotions in a calm way, cannot truly listen, and cannot distinguish between needs and unrealistic expectations. They deeply believe that, as long as I go to work, bring money home, don't cheat, don't drink too much, that's enough to be a good husband. They are now facing wives who want conversation, shared housework, and a voice in decision-making, and their first reaction is often, "Why do you ask for so much? My mother never demanded that." In their eyes, requests for emotional communication and shared housework also sound like a form of entitlement. The striking thing is that both sides feel they give more than they receive. One says, "I sacrificed my youth to be with him." The other says, "I worked myself to the bone for this family." When everyone clings to the story, "I am the one being wronged," then any request from the other side can easily be heard as an accusation. The original essay is quite right on one key point. When the distance between expectations and capacity or contribution becomes too large, resentment will grow in the relationship. But what that essay leaves out is that this gap is widening on both sides. And it's not just a story of women being too lazy to cook. It's the result of a whole chain of socio-economic changes. Urbanization, longer working hours, social media, consumer culture, a lack of education in emotional skills. We are living in a world far more complex than the one our grandparents knew. Yet almost no one has stopped long enough to teach the next generation how to live with another human being in such a world. Whenever I talk to young people, whether male or female, I keep hearing a repeating pattern. The feeling that I deserve more than what I have right now. Part of that feeling comes from a very legitimate drive. You have a right to want a better life, a healthier relationship. But it is also amplified and distorted by thousands of daily inputs. Videos, posts, images of ideal lives. Bits of advice like, if they don't meet your standards, walk away without looking back. A young woman sat across from me, opened her phone, and showed me a video from a love coach saying, "A man who truly loves you will spend money without hesitation, will read your mind without you saying a word, will always take initiative." I asked her, "Do you think anyone in real life can read minds without the other person speaking?" She laughed, then fell silent. But that voice had already planted a highly idealized image in her mind. A man who does not exist in reality. At the same time, men are drowning in another type of content. Women today only demand and give nothing. Don't trust them. Keep your distance. Filter ruthlessly. The essay you shared belongs to that second category. It does not just reflect personal experience. It also reinforces a specific script about women as a uniform mass, lacking skills, full of demands, incapable of gratitude. When both genders are programmed like this, they walk into relationships with a heap of suspicion, checklists, prejudices, and fears. Every small behaviour of the other is interpreted through that lens. She forgets to cook a few times, and he immediately labels her as that urban irresponsible type. He forgets to compliment her new dress, and she immediately concludes, he doesn't love me anymore. Instead of asking, what is going on in his or her life that led to this, we rush to drag out our whole library of memes and toxic advice to conclude, right, they belong to that awful group social media talks about. From this perspective, the original essay is itself a product of social media. The emotional volume is turned all the way up. There is a lot of overgeneralizing, a lot of absolute statements like, almost all women under 40 are programmed beyond repair. Sentences like that have no place in serious scientific work, but they perform incredibly well on the internet. It uses the language of market, of filtering out 95% of women, turning human beings into items on some emotional trading floor. For psychology, this is dangerous because it makes us forget that each person is a distinct story with their own history and their own capacity to grow and change. One of the most accurate and also most worrying parts of the original essay is the psychological strategy that many men are now applying, lowering their expectations to the point where they practically expect nothing in terms of contribution from the person beside them. They tell me, I've stopped asking her to do anything, because every time I open my mouth, it turns into a fight. From once wanting a teammate, they gradually turn themselves into the one who just does it all so the house stays calm. At first glance, this sounds like a practical solution. Fewer requests, fewer disappointments, fewer demands, fewer conflicts. But in the long run, it creates exactly what the essay describes. A parent-child dynamic rather than a partnership, where one person carries everything and the other never needs to develop basic life skills. However, as a psychologist, I don't see this as the fault of lazy women alone, but as the result of a vicious interaction loop. If, right from the beginning, during dating and early marriage, they never really talked about expectations, never recognized each other's skill gaps, never invested in building habits of cooperation, then it is almost inevitable that one of them will end up saying, "Fine, I'll just do it all." Some do it out of love, some out of fear of conflict, some out of their internalized belief that a man must shoulder everything. Over time, this behavior unintentionally sends a signal to the other person. They will always do it. I don't have to try. Here, the importance of boundaries and standards. In couples that remain healthy over time, both the man and the woman learn how to say no to unreasonable demands, and yes to learning new skills together. They don't see cooking or financial management as fixed traits based on gender, but as learnable competencies. In that framework, sentences like, "I'm a woman, I don't have to know how to do this," or "I'm a man, I don't need to learn how to talk about feelings," have no legitimate place. Where I part ways with the essay is in its framing of boundary setting as warfare. filter out 95% of women.
Kick anyone out of your life who doesn't meet your criteria. It sounds very empowering, very cathartic. But from a psychological point of view, the more a person glorifies the idea of filtering people out, the more I am tempted to ask, have you ever seriously looked at what you bring to a relationship? At your blind spots, your emotional skill deficits, your unhealed wounds? Boundaries are healthy and absolutely necessary, but when they come packaged with total self-idealization and an absence of self-critique, that's not maturity, it's narcissistic defense. Many couples come to therapy in exactly this state. What used to be seen as meaningful effort is now dismissed as merely the bare minimum. The wife says, "Going to work and earning money is obviously your duty as a man. What's there to be grateful for?" The husband replies, "Taking care of the kids is the mother's job. Why should that be acknowledged?" When everything the other person does is downgraded to, of course, we start seeing only what they fail to do or don't do enough of. In these stories, I don't see modern women being ungrateful or modern men being entitled, but two people suffering from the same blindness to each other's efforts. Modern society trains us to look upward and outward, to compare our lives with some imagined best version, rather than look down at the very real life in front of us. A husband working 60 hours a week but trying to come home early on Fridays to play with his child can easily be compared to some online image of a Western man who is always smiling, always cooking, always sharing his emotions. A wife who works, tends the children and runs the household can be compared to the ideal of a young female CEO who manages a business, cooks like a TV chef, and remains endlessly cheerful and soft-spoken. Both look at fictional standards and feel the person beside them is not enough. The original essay is correct about this. When appreciation disappears, respect erodes. And when respect is gone, love struggles to survive. But again, it places almost all responsibility on women. From a psychological point of view, the responsibility is clearly shared. Everyone needs to learn how to say thank you for small things and I'm sorry when they're wrong. No gender gets a pass on this basic lesson. One of the most troubling aspects of the essay is its sweeping claims about a very large group of people. Most women under 40 can't. The younger generation is basically unmarriageable. The majority have been programmed beyond repair. Overgeneralization is a classic cognitive distortion in psychology. We take a handful of painful experiences and use them to define everyone, and the brain, which loves simple stories, quickly adopts that as unquestioned truth. In practice, I see many young women with excellent life skills. They can work, cook, manage money, and are very willing to learn what they don't yet know. They may be clumsy sometimes, emotional at times, occasionally demanding, but they don't resemble the caricature of parasitic and ungrateful that the essay draws. I also see young men who know how to do housework, care for children, and listen attentively, but who are so wounded by past experiences that they start collapsing all women into one negative stereotype. Why are the positive stories told less often? Because they are less dramatic, less clickable than tales of outrage and betrayal. Between a video about a couple slowly learning to share chores and communicate better and a video about a wife who never does anything but demands a luxury lifestyle, which one is more likely to go viral? Our brains are wired to lock onto content that stirs intense emotions: anger, contempt, moral indignation. From a scholarly standpoint, a healthier approach is to respect the genuine suffering of those who feel used or taken for granted, while expanding the frame. This is one slice of reality, not the total picture. It tells us a lot about a subset of people and about the inner world of a wounded man, but very little about the true nature of modern women as a whole. When we let go of absolute claims and avoid turning any group into a broken generation, we create space to ask more nuanced questions. What part of this picture belongs to me? What part to societal structures? What part to historical change? Many men who read essays like this come into therapy with a deep inner conflict. I don't want to endure an unfair relationship, but I also don't want to be alone. They might agree with many of the criticisms of women in the essay, yet still deeply long for a warm bond in which they are not perpetually braced for impact. Some choose to shut down, focus on work, friends, and hobbies. Others keep dating, but in a state of constant suspicion, always ready to walk away and armed with an endless list of criteria. When working with them, I don't advise just lower your standards, nor keep your standards sky high. Instead, I invite them to disentangle three things: core values, essential needs, and personal preferences. Core values are things which, if missing, will deform your sense of self in the relationship. Mutual respect, honesty, non-violence. Essential needs are those which allow daily life to function. A reasonable sharing of financial responsibility, participation in housework, co-parenting. Personal preferences are the nice-to-have items: looks, fashion style, sense of humour, similar hobbies. When we mix these three together, we easily turn a mere preference into a non-negotiable value and end up excluding a huge number of potentially compatible partners. The original essay uses language like test, filter, eliminate immediately if she lacks cooking skills, cleaning ability, financial contribution. But never asks, is she willing to learn, to build a sustainable lifestyle with you? Someone who doesn't cook today is not necessarily doomed to never cook 3 years from now, as long as she has motivation and is treated as a partner rather than a student being graded. On the flip side, women need to do a similar exercise to distinguish between core traits, honesty, responsibility, kindness, and preferences, romantic gestures, height, charm, wit. When both genders are invited into this deeper self-inquiry, standards cease to be a shopping list used to exclude people and become a map for finding someone who shares your direction and your willingness to grow. There is something genuinely humane. It tells men you are not crazy, your feelings are real, you have the right not to accept an unfair relationship. On that level, I agree with its spirit. No one, man or woman, should be taught to stay in a dynamic of exploitation, contempt, or chronic disregard. Everyone should learn to respect themselves, set limits, and walk away from truly toxic situations. But if we stop there and turn anger into an identity, we get stuck. Many men who wake up, in the essay's sense, start seeing all women through a lens of distrust. She probably just wants to take without giving. She's probably been programmed already. Similarly, many women, after a diet of extreme self-worth empowerment content, start seeing all men as disposable or easily replaceable if they don't meet a long wish list. In therapeutic terms, I see both reactions as two faces of the same fear. Fear of being hurt, of being belittled, of losing control. When that fear becomes too large, our defense mechanisms kick in. Blaming, judging, overgeneralizing, even boycotting an entire gender. These defenses give a powerful sense of safety, but they also block authentic connection. The way out is not to numb the pain by blaming modern women or modern men, but to do the more difficult work of turning inwards. The man can ask,
Am I truly listening, communicating, setting healthy boundaries? Or am I just silently enduring until I explode? The woman can ask, do I see my own contribution to this relationship
as part of my personal growth, or am I obsessed only with what I receive? And both can ask, what are we actually building together, or are we just bargaining to minimize our own sacrifice? When these questions are asked in a safe space, be it a therapist's office or a sincere, non-defensive conversation, texts like the original essay can be put in their proper place, not as the truth about women, but as testimony from a group of men who are hurting, exhausted, and trying to protect themselves in a world that is changing too fast. When we learn to hear both the pain and the prejudice in such texts, and then compare them with the pain and prejudice on the other side, we can begin constructing a healthier bridge between the sexes. If I had to reduce everything to a single image, I would compare modern male-female relationships to a bridge being rebuilt while people still have to cross it every day. Our grandparents' generation walked across an old bridge, solid but simple. Roles were clearly defined, choices were limited, and because of that, people had fewer existential doubts. That bridge was far from perfect and certainly not always fair, but people knew how to walk on it. Our generation is stuck between the old bridge and a new one. Traditional roles are being questioned, choices and opportunities have multiplied, but the skills needed to use those freedoms wisely have not yet caught up. In such a moment, it is almost inevitable that we will hear angry, alarmed voices like the essay you shared. They are like people shouting from one side of the bridge, "Look, everything is collapsing!" Those shouts do serve a function. They force us to look at real cracks, the imbalance of contribution, the disappearing habit of gratitude, the decay of basic life skills, the crazy expectations pumped up by social media. But if we just stand there shouting and pointing fingers at one gender while no one learns how to build, then the shouting simply scares everyone and pushes us further apart. From a psychological perspective, the goal is not to resurrect a bygone world where women go back to being exactly like grandma, or men go back to being the sole pillar, but to see human beings, regardless of gender, as people capable of learning the art of living together. That art includes taking responsibility for one's own life, contributing to the relationship, admitting mistakes, saying thank you, setting boundaries without humiliating the other, saying "I need you" without collapsing into helplessness. It does not need to be a simple rebuttal to the original text. It can be an invitation. It can gently invite listeners, men and women alike, to pause the impulse to condemn a whole gender and instead ask the more difficult but more liberating question, in this shared story, what is the part I can do differently? If enough people start genuinely asking that question, we will have less need for angry manifestos, and we will begin to see more stories of repair, healing, and mutual growth.